The sun had barely begun its climb over the jagged horizon when the vast expanse of the desert stirred to life. The wind whispered through the canyons, carrying the dry scent of sand and sagebrush, teasing the edges of the cowboy's weathered hat as he rode along the rugged trail. Dust rose in clouds behind him with each steady, rhythmic step of his horse, a loyal chestnut stallion named Bramble, whose muscles flexed with the precision of countless days on the open plains. The cowboy, known to the nearby settlements only as Callahan, had the kind of face carved by experience, sun-leathered skin, eyes that had seen both beauty and brutality, and hands that could tame wild horses or wrestle a man to the ground in seconds. He rode with an instinctive ease, a silent harmony with the land that seemed to welcome him even as the desert remained unforgiving. It was on such a morning that fate stirred in the shadows of a rocky outcrop. Callahan was scanning the horizon for signs of movement, cattle tracks, the flicker of distant riders, the occasional swirl of dust from unseen marauders, when a sound, sharp and terrified, cut through the morning air. It was a scream, sudden and raw, mingled with the guttural growl of predators. Callahan's heart quickened, and without a word, he spurred Bramble toward the source, instincts honed through years of survival guiding him. Around the bend of a narrow canyon, he found her, a young Apache girl, barely older than 16, tangled in the brambles at the edge of a dry creek. Her eyes were wide with terror, her small hands grasping desperately at the air as two wild wolves circled her, teeth bared, snarling with a hunger that was both primal and patient. Her chest heaved, the panic in her lungs visible in every frantic breath, and for a moment, Callahan considered the odds. Wolves in the wild were merciless, their jaws capable of crushing bone in a heartbeat. Yet something in her stance, a stubborn spark of defiance, a will to survive, stirred him. He didn't hesitate. Callahan swung from Bramble's saddle, landing with the grace of a man whose body had been tested by a lifetime of danger. He drew his rifle with deliberate speed, aiming first at the wolf lunging from the left, then the second. The cracks of his shots echoed against the canyon walls, startling the creatures into retreat. The wolves, snarling and wounded, vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a tense silence. The girl collapsed to her knees, trembling, her gaze fixed on the man who had just saved her life. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the settling dust. Callahan offered a faint nod, his expression unreadable but his eyes softening as he approached her cautiously. You're safe now, he said, voice low and steady. Can you stand? With a hesitant effort, she rose, brushing tears and dirt from her clothes. Her hands were scraped and bleeding, and the wildness in her eyes was mingled with gratitude and lingering fear. Callahan offered her his hand, and she accepted it, her fingers brushing against his in a fleeting, electric moment that neither fully acknowledged but both felt. As they made their way back to Bramble, the girl's voice trembled, curiosity mingling with caution. Who are you? She asked. Callahan hesitated, rarely sharing more than necessary. Callahan, he said finally. And you? She paused, her gaze flickering to the canyon walls as if the shadows might hold other dangers. They call me Ahuli, she said softly. The name carried a cadence that seemed to dance with the wind, mysterious and strong. The ride back to the small clearing where Callahan had left his camp was quiet but tense. Ahuli's eyes constantly scanned the horizon, and though she had survived the immediate threat, the wilderness remained an unpredictable adversary. Callahan respected her vigilance but also felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Protecting someone like her in the open plains was no small task. By the time they reached the camp, the sun had risen fully, casting a golden hue over the desert. Callahan set about tending to her wounds, cleaning cuts and binding them with rough cloth from his saddlebag. Ahuli winced occasionally, but her composure remained, and he found himself silently admiring her resilience. You have courage, he said quietly, almost as an observation rather than praise. She looked up at him, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something unspoken. I had no choice, she replied. They would have taken me. Her words carried weight, and Callahan understood without asking. There was a story behind her, layers of hardship and survival that were etched into the lines of her face, even at such a young age. As they settled around the fire that evening, the silence between them was filled with the crackle of flames and the distant call of a hawk. Callahan broke the quiet first. You're far from home, he said. Ahuli nodded, her gaze fixed on the fire. I ran, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. They wanted to take me somewhere I did not wish to go. The night grew deeper, stars blanketing the sky in a brilliant display. In the flickering light of the campfire, an unspoken bond began to form between them, a fragile trust, born of danger and survival. Callahan knew that the desert could be merciless, that threats lurked beyond every ridge and canyon. Yet in that moment, he also knew that he would not let anything happen to Ahuli. And she, in turn, began to understand that Callahan was no ordinary man. His presence was a shield, a force of nature in itself, and for the first time since her flight, she allowed herself to imagine safety. The chapter closed with the two sitting by the fire, the quiet hum of the wilderness surrounding them, each lost in their thoughts. Callahan's eyes scanned the horizon, ever watchful, while Ahuli's thoughts wandered to the strange twist of fate that had placed her in the hands of a man who was both a stranger and a protector. In the heart of the unforgiving desert, a story was beginning to unfold, one of survival, courage, and a connection that neither could yet name, but both would come to realize was unbreakable. The morning broke over the desert like a whispered warning. The pale light revealed tracks in the sand, some fresh, others old, and Callahan knew instinctively that their journey would be far from simple. Ahuli rode close to him, her posture taut, eyes darting to every ridge and crevice, scanning for threats that might come from the unforgiving landscape. Though the previous night had brought a fragile sense of safety, the desert offered no lasting refuge, and both understood that. As they moved through a narrow canyon, the wind carried more than just dust, it carried the faint echoes of movement, the subtle crackle of branches, and the distant howl of wolves. Callahan's hand hovered near his rifle, senses sharpened by experience. "Stay close," he murmured to Ahuli, who nodded without words, trusting him despite the fear that still lingered in her chest. Every step forward was a careful negotiation with the land, with danger, and with the unknown. Hours passed, and the terrain grew harsher. Jagged rocks tore at brambles' hooves, thorn bushes scratched at clothing and skin, and the sun beat down with relentless intensity. Ahuli, though young, moved with surprising endurance, her determination fueled by the memory of what she had narrowly escaped. Callahan admired her spirit, but he also recognized the danger of pushing too far. A misstep here could be fatal, whether from the elements, predators, or men with darker intentions. Their path led them to a ridge overlooking a valley shrouded in mist. From this vantage point, the world stretched endlessly, twisting rivers, clumps of forest, and the faint glimmer of a settlement in the distance. But something felt off. The air was thick with anticipation, the quiet too deliberate, and Callahan's instincts screamed warning. "Something's not right," he said. Ahuli's eyes mirrored his concern, but she remained silent, understanding instinctively that no words could fully capture the tension of the moment. Suddenly, the silence shattered. A group of riders emerged from the tree line, their faces masked, their intentions unmistakable. Callahan's hand went to his rifle, but there was no time to aim carefully. The riders charged, shouting war cries that echoed through the valley, a terrifying chorus that sent a shiver down Ahuli's spine. Callahan kicked Bramble into motion, maneuvering to intercept, shielding Ahuli from the immediate danger. Shots rang out, and the smell of gunpowder mingled with dust and sweat. Amid the chaos, Ahuli discovered a courage she had never known. Though terrified, she grabbed a fallen branch and swung at the nearest attacker, forcing him back just long enough for Callahan to take control. Together, they fought with a rhythm born of desperation and survival. Callahan's eyes, usually steady and calculated, now blazed with a ferocity that demanded attention. Each move he made protected Ahuli, each decision a gamble with life and death. When the dust settled, the attackers were gone, some fleeing into the hills, others injured and limping. Ahuli collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily, her body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. Callahan knelt beside her, checking for injuries, his face unreadable but his concern evident. "You did well," he said finally, his voice low but firm. She looked up at him, eyes shining with a mix of fear, relief, and something else, gratitude, trust, and an unspoken bond that had deepened through the trial they had just survived. As evening fell, they found shelter in a small cave, hidden from the prying eyes of anyone who might follow. The fire they lit flickered against the rock walls, casting long shadows that danced like specters around them. Callahan prepared a modest meal, the ritual grounding them both after the intensity of the day. Ahuli watched him, noticing the quiet strength in his actions, the way he moved with purpose and precision. In that moment, she realized that he was not just a protector, but someone she could rely on, someone whose presence alone was a shield against the harsh world outside. The conversation that night was cautious, exploratory. Ahuli spoke of her tribe, of the dangers that had forced her to flee, and of the fear that still lingered in her heart. Callahan listened, offering no judgment, only understanding. "The world can be cruel," he said softly, "but there are also people who fight to make it right. You're stronger than you know, and together, we can face what comes." His words were simple, but they carried weight, planting a seed of hope in her chest where fear had long held dominion. As the stars shimmered overhead, their connection grew, unspoken yet undeniable. Each had endured loss and hardship, yet in each other, they found an anchor. The desert around them was wild and untamed, but within the fragile safety of their temporary refuge, a new chapter of their lives was beginning, a chapter of courage, of trust, and of a bond that neither could yet fully name. Before sleep claimed them, Callahan spoke again, his voice almost a whisper. "Whatever happens, you're not alone. Not anymore." Ahuli's heart beat rapidly, not from fear this time, but from a dawning realization that in this vast, dangerous world, she had found someone who would fight for her, someone who saw her not as a burden but as a person worth protecting. The desert night stretched on, vast and silent, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Ahuli allowed herself to feel something beyond fear. Hope. And as they drifted into sleep beside the dying fire, the story of their journey, of survival, and of an unbreakable bond continued, promising challenges, revelations, and triumphs yet to come.